Um, just very peaceful.
Oh, the world would be a much better place.
Uh, well, I guess I would be how I would be as if it were.
I don't think there'd be that much of a change in the world, really. It's not like I'm not really making an impact, so things would go on as they were, or before. Um, there might be. Um, I haven't left a footprint as such, so it would be as it was.
No idea how to reply to that.
Ooh. Um, Dark, probably. Um, and uh, empty. Um, I, if I weren't, I don't know. I always associate that sort of idea with being in a coffin, so that's very much being somewhere. So I don't know. Um, Probably quite relaxing, really. Not so stressful as if I were. I don't know. Candle blown out sort of thing. I don't know. That's sort of, maybe I'd smoke a bit.
If I wasn't if I wasn't alive, is that what it means? Well, I know I'd be in heaven and I'd be with Robert and with Robert's mum and Robert's dad and my mum and my dad and with all my uncles and aunts. I'd be very happy. So I think I would get a sense of fulfillment.
Oh, that's obviously a purposely impossible question. I can only think of it in contents of kind of like never having been rather than weren't, or maybe ceasing to be. But obviously that's because my concept of being is in parallel to being alive, I guess, which is starts with birth and ends with death. So I can only think of not being in context, yeah, having never been or ceasing to be. So that's how I'm interpreting it. I don't know how it would be if I weren't. So I guess also if I'm considering it that way, it's like either that I've never, like, what would it be if I'd never been, or if I like ceased to be? And I can only think of that in context of like other people and other people's reactions, I guess. So I don't know what it would be like for me if I weren't, because I wouldn't be. So it wouldn't be anything for me.
I don't think there'd be a comparative, and would there? Because that was something that I used to think about when I was a child, and just trying to imagine the absence of anything. And you know, you need presence, no absence, surely. So if you were not, how would you have a qualitative feel? You know, how would you even understand that absence in your own absence? There would be no qualitative feel with no sentience, surely. So what would it be like? There would be no like. If I was not, I wouldn't. If I was not, I just wouldn't. I suppose that's it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's just it's irrelevant. But I mean, it would be like everything that it is now minus everything it is now, I guess.
That is my cue.
The world will probably have a little percentage of entertainment taken away. And all the spaces I've been in would have been a little emptier. And all the conversations I've had, if they weren't, because I wasn't, would mean that a little piece of each and every single person that I've interacted with would have a little less, if you could see it that way. And I don't know, I just suppose there's many definitions that you could give to that question. I think all the things that I've just said are obviously saying that there would be a lack. So obviously there would be a lack, but then at the same time, if I weren't, that could possibly mean that there was something somewhere else, or that there would have been space for something else. But that just depends on how you look at it, I suppose. And if I weren't, I suppose I could never really actually, to the best ability, respond to that question because I wouldn't know that I wasn't, even though that sounds like an obvious notion. That's about it.
Ooh, well, I am. And that's almost a Descartes question, you know. I think, therefore I am.
What would it be like if I wasn't? If I weren't, in fact. Well, I guess up until 26 years ago, everything would be exactly the same. Since that point, for 99.999, maybe a couple more places of the world, life would be exactly the same. For a few people very close to me, say my mum, my dad, they might have just had another kid shortly afterwards, and I I don't know if life would be very different for them either. That's the traditional way of looking at it. But if you take a kind of monist view of it, which I sort of do, I think if I weren't, there would be nothing. That, I mean, all this is kind of made by me, you know. You don't, the nature of kind of substance and matter is so kind of nonsensical and paradoxical and just sort of mixed up and everything, little part of everything else, that the only thing that makes things into things, all the delineation and stuff, all comes from me in the first place. So if I weren't, then there would be nothing.
If I didn't exist. I guess, I don't know, there's kind of two aspects to that, I guess. So on the one hand, you could see it objectively, like what would the world be like if I just hadn't been born into it, and what would have happened without that element also put in. But subjectively, I can't really comment because that's just not everything I would be about to say. I don't know. You would be quiet.
What? I don't think you're being very specific here. You haven't finished the question. If I weren't... Well, I think I can't really conceive of that because I am something. But I have an idea. I have quite a strong idea. But it's a personal experience. I think it's pointless describing because I think by attempting to describe it, it would just defeat the point. That's all I can say.
I think that a non-experience is like a non-possibility, so I can't really conceive of it. The natural question is like, if I wasn't what? But I think you're always something. Like, even like before and after you die, you're like always something. I don't think there's the option. I don't think that's an option. I think the question is meaningless.
Good question. I suppose I fill in the rest of that question. What would it be like if I weren't an artist? I have no idea. Maybe a bit boring, or at least from my point of view that I'm in now. What would it be like if I weren't struggling all the time? That would be amazing. To have more time, or to make more time. That seems to be the main thing. How long do I have to go on this? A lot of thinking there on that. It's difficult. This is a hard one, Pascal. What would it be like if I weren't? What else? I can't think of any other existence that I have right now. So it's hard to imagine not being where I'm at, I suppose. The only thing I fantasize about really is that having time for my work, or time for myself, or for my head or my thoughts. Not being so occupied with sort of peripheral things, kind of basic needs, getting by, food, shelter, those kind of things, but just focusing on things that I'm interested in, I suppose.
What would it be like if I weren't? What would it be like if I weren't? I have no idea. Reminds me of that, what's that film with Dustin Hoffman? Film with Dustin Hoffman and the other lady. And there's a question in it. It's like, how am I not myself? How am I not myself? Reminds me of that. What was the question again?
What would it be like if you weren't?
What would it be like if I weren't? I have no idea, mate. If I weren't. No idea.